Hello everybody, it's Method Mondays from IELTS Coach Pro. My name is Robbie Hart and I am really excited for today's video because I think it's the best one we've made so far. I think this is the video that's going to help you get your target band score more than any video that we've made yet. And getting your target band is what I know you want. I know that's why you're watching this video. And so stick around. If you do watch all the way to the end, there is a free gift for you. Also be sure to like this video, comment, and definitely subscribe because we make IELTS Methods videos every Monday and you don't want to miss one because they are very helpful for all of the IELTS sections. Today is week 3 in our IELTS Writing Task 2 mini course. And so in week 1, we looked at task achievement. In week 2, we looked at coherence and cohesion. And today we are looking at grammatical range and accuracy. And like I said, this one is huge for a lot of people. This is what is holding them back and keeping them stuck at a 5.5 when they need a 6, or maybe a 6.5 when they need a 7. So if that is you, or if you're anyone preparing for IELTS, stick around and I hope this video is helpful, okay? Before I get into the method, I think it's important to tell you how IELTS grammar works. And so the best analogy I could think of is to say that IELTS grammar is like gymnastics. And what I mean by that is if you've ever watched Olympic gymnastics, you probably know that the judges are giving the gymnasts scores based on the degree of difficulty of their routine, like how exciting it is and how challenging it is, and also on the accuracy of their routine. Did they avoid mistakes and avoid errors? And IELTS grammar is very similar. They are scoring your grammatical range, which means attempting difficult sentences and attempting a wide variety of sentence structures. They are also grading your accuracy. So it's important to avoid errors and mistakes. And so in IELTS grammar, there's always this balance of you don't want to do something that's too difficult for you and fall on your face and make some horrible errors that make it impossible to understand your essay, but you don't want to make your grammar too simple either. Because if your grammar is simple, even if all of your sentences are perfect and error-free, you're still going to get a low grammar score. And so you always want to focus on accuracy. You always want to be improving that. But you also need to push yourself in grammatical range. And it's better to attempt some complex sentences, some difficult sentences, even if you have a few more errors. It's better to attempt them because they're going to increase your score. And I'll show you why, okay? So these are the descriptions for IELTS Band 7 grammar and IELTS Band 8 grammar. The reason I'm showing you both of them is because even Band 7 in IELTS grammar is a big achievement. So normally I only show you Band 8 because we always want to try to get Band 8. But here, Band 7 is a big achievement in IELTS grammar, and most people don't even achieve Band 7. So it's good to shoot for Band 8. It's also good to be aware of what you need to do to get a 7 as well. And so to get a Band 7, you need to produce frequent error-free sentences. That means more than half of your sentences need to contain 0 errors, which is actually pretty difficult. So that's important. You also need to have good control of grammar and punctuation. But that top one, this is what we're going to be focusing on today because this is the one thing in IELTS that if people fixed it up and did it properly would probably benefit their score the most. So to get a Band 7, you need to use a variety of complex structures. Complex is such an important word. And we are going to spend a lot of time today looking at exactly what is a complex structure, how do we do them, and how do we do a variety of complex structures, okay? And so band 8 is very similar, but just a little bit better. So in addition to having a variety of complex structures, to achieve band 8, you need a wide range of structures. It means you just pushed yourself a little bit more and had a little bit wider range of structures than band 7. The majority of sentences are error-free. So here they're looking for about 2/3 of error-free sentences and only occasional errors or inappropriacies, which is a little bit better than the description for band 7. But again, if you can get a 7 in IELTS Writing Grammar, you will be miles ahead of most people and you will be well on your way to getting your target band. However, the principles we're teaching you today will also allow you to get an 8 or a 9 if you do them properly. But it takes a lot of practice and a lot of mastery of these skills. And so the real kicker here is if you don't use any complex sentences, you get a band 4 in IELTS Writing Grammar. And I'll put a link to the official scoring criteria below. If you don't believe me, you can look at it for yourself, but they specifically say exactly what you need to do for each of the band scores in IELTS Writing Grammar, and even a 5 requires you to attempt some complex sentences. Again, they don't all have to be perfect, but if you don't attempt a complex sentence in your IELTS Writing Task 2 essay, you will get a band 4 in grammar. And we don't want that, so we are going to show you exactly what you need to do to put a variety of complex sentences into your essay and get a band 7, 8, or even 9. In English, there are 4 types of sentence structures. So there are simple sentences, which have one main verb and one main noun, which is known as the subject. Compound sentences are basically just 2 sentences linked together with a connecting word and a comma. But complex sentences, which is what IELTS is really looking for, and this is what we're going to be focusing on today, complex sentences have a main sentence, which is called an independent clause, and then they have another clause that has a subject and a verb, but this other subject and verb could not stand alone as its own sentence. And so that's called a dependent clause, and that is what makes your sentence complex, and that is how you increase your IELTS score. Number 4 is compound complex sentences. So it's just taking all the attributes of compound, doing it, and then adding in the complex elements as well. We're not going to get too much into compound complex sentences today, but maybe in another video we'll do that. So, like I said, a complex sentence has at least one independent clause, and an independent clause is just something that could basically stand alone as its own sentence. And then in addition to that, your sentence needs at least one dependent clause, which is something that has a subject and a verb, but that subject and verb could not stand alone as its own sentence. And what makes something a dependent clause is introducing it with a subordinating conjunction. And so these are the key words that you want to use to get a high IELTS Task 2 Writing Grammar score. And I do want to make a couple points here. The first point is these are not like magic words, so you can't just put them in and automatically expect a high score. You need to use them with skill. You need to use them in a variety of ways. You need to use them in the right places and with the right sentence structures. And so it takes a lot of practice, but you really can master these. And if you practice the ones that we're teaching you today, you will increase your IELTS grammar score. So this is not an exhaustive list. This is not all of the subordinating conjunctions, but it is a good set of them. Most of the subordinating conjunctions that you will use on your essay are somewhere on this list, okay? And so subordinating conjunctions, sometimes they have to do with time. So you could say, I was eating dinner when my mother called, okay? In that sentence, when is a subordinating conjunction, and it is a complex sentence because that phrase, when my mother called, could not stand alone. You couldn't make a sentence that just said, when my mother called. That would be an error, okay? And so these subordinating conjunctions of time, usually people don't struggle with them as much. So you're probably naturally putting some complex sentences into your IELTS writing, even if you didn't know it was complex, okay? But these contrast and cause words are pretty simple to learn, but lots of times people just don't put them in their essays because they didn't think about it or they were never taught to use these words. We're going to look at 6 of them, especially today, because these are the 6 that come up the most often that you will be able to use in the highest percentage of your IELTS Task 2 essays. But the other ones on this list are helpful as well, and also there are some that are not even on this list. So you should always be learning new grammar, practicing your grammar, improving your grammar. But the 6 we're going to look at today can be extremely helpful, okay? We're not going to look at conditional statements like if statements. We're not going to look at place conjunctions, and we're not going to look at relative pronouns today. If you want us to do a lesson on those, write that in the comments. You know, if there's anything you ever want to see a video on, write it in the comments, but we don't have time to cover everything today. So we're going to focus on these 6 conjunctions of contrast and cause. So here are 2 formulas that you can use to create a complex sentence. You can start with the independent clause and then add a dependent clause. And the dependent clause will always contain your subordinating conjunction at the beginning of that dependent clause. So for formula number 1, my example is, I passed the IELTS exam because I studied hard. That is a complex sentence. I know it doesn't look long and impressive, but it's a complex sentence. Whenever you use the word because in the middle of your sentence, it's complex and you're upping your score. That doesn't mean you should put because in all of your sentences. Again, we need a variety, but you're off to a good start if you're using the word because somewhere in your essay. The second formula is if you switch the order around. So you put the dependent clause first, because I studied hard, then you put a comma, and then you put your independent clause. The green could stand alone. I passed the IELTS exam. That could be a sentence all by itself, but here we've made it more complicated. We've made it complex. And so if you put the dependent clause first, which means putting your linking word or your subordinating conjunction, here we have because. If you put that first, then you need a comma after your dependent clause. So here, because I studied hard, comma, I passed the IELTS exam. And so it's important to know both of these because if you're going to use a variety of sentence structures, it means sometimes you're going to have the dependent clause first. Sometimes you're going to have the dependent clause second, and you need to switch things up. Don't use the same pattern every time because that's boring and that will lower your score. Okay, here we have our 6 power conjunctions. Yeah, so these are the 6 conjunctions that come up the most that are going to improve your score the most. Okay, so we use although when we have a contradiction. We can also use even though in the same way we use although. We have while when we're contrasting 2 different points of view, and whereas can also be used in the same way. And then we have the word because when one thing is the cause and the other thing is the effect. And since also means the same thing as because. And the reason I gave you 2 for each meaning is because when you're writing your essay, you're probably going to have to repeat your ideas, maybe once in your introduction and once in the conclusion, or maybe you might have ideas that you repeat multiple times in your essay, but you don't want to use the same word every time. You don't want to use the exact same sentence structure every time. because you need to be using a variety of words. That helps your vocabulary score, but also a variety of sentence structures. And so being flexible and having 2 words for each of these meanings is very helpful, okay? So here are some examples. Although is for something that feels like a contradiction or a surprise. Like, although I studied for IELTS, I still failed. Like, man, I wasn't expecting that. I studied for IELTS. I failed. It's not expected. It's a contradiction almost. Even though is used the same way. Even though I studied for IELTS, I still failed. So that's how you use those. While and whereas are a little bit different. You can use them for contrast, which isn't really the same as a contradiction. It's not like a surprise. It's just 2 different ways of doing things or 2 different points of view. So you could say, while some people study for IELTS, others choose not to. So I'm comparing one side with the other side. While and whereas are especially helpful in your discuss both views types of essays, because in those you are comparing one side of an argument with the other side. So you can use while and whereas for those types of essays. Again, whereas means the same thing as while. Whereas some people study for IELTS, others choose not to. Another thing about these words is I'm giving you 6 words and 1 meaning for each word. Now, there are other meanings for all of these words. Because I taught you one way to use this word today, don't let that limit you if you know other ways to use these words. So words like while and whereas and since, they have other meanings. And so definitely use words in a variety of ways if you know all the different meanings and all the different usages, okay? Because is used for when one thing causes something else. Because I studied, I passed the IELTS exam. Since is the same. Since I studied, I passed the IELTS exam. And for all of these, because we put our subordinating conjunction first, that means our dependent clause is first, because the dependent clause always starts with a subordinating conjunction. And when we put that clause first, we need a comma. But if we switched the order of these sentences, we would not need a comma. So in these cases, the conjunction's in the middle of your sentence, and your dependent clause is last, okay? And your independent clause is first. So in these cases, you don't use a comma. I failed my IELTS exam, although I studied quite hard. Some people study for IELTS, whereas others choose not to. I passed the IELTS exam because I studied. So when it's in the middle there, you don't need a comma. So that's all well and good, but what does it look like on a real IELTS essay? Because that's the important thing. So today we're going to be looking at an advantages and disadvantages essay. Sometimes with these, they ask for your opinion. Sometimes they don't. So today we're going to be looking at one where they do ask for your opinion. So when they ask for it, it's important that you give it. So here's our example question prompt today. It says, a growing number of cities are making their centers pedestrian-only zones. Do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? So that word outweigh is how we know they're asking for our opinion here. They're not just asking, hey, talk about the advantages and the disadvantages. They're saying, do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? Which side is more significant? Okay? And so when it's like this, we need to discuss the advantages. We can't just put yes as our answer to this question and say, oh, I answered the question, my essay's done. Obviously, we need to discuss the advantages. We need to discuss the disadvantages, but we also need to weave our opinion in here somewhere because they said, do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. Okay. Again, here is our list of subordinating conjunctions. I'm going to be using a lot of these green ones. I'm also going to be using some relative pronouns, and so anytime I use a word from this list in my essay, I'm going to highlight it in review and explain to you how I used it to make a complex sentence. So let's look at my essay here. More and more, cities are deciding to restrict the access of vehicles in their centers. Although there are some drawbacks to this phenomenon, such as decreased convenience and the loss of business in some stores, the advantages of cleaner air and safer experiences significantly outweigh any negative repercussions. So I started that sentence with although, which makes it complex. And in that sentence, I listed all my main points, which if you watch some of our other videos, you know that this is a perfect two-sentence introduction. I started by paraphrasing the general statement, and then I put my thesis in my second sentence, which means I just put all of my main points into one sentence. So if you want to learn about introductions in detail, watch our introductions video, but I'm going to move on to my first body paragraph, okay? The main disadvantages of ridding city centers of cars and bikes are that it will be less convenient to travel downtown, and that some shops will lose money. So that is a relative pronoun. It's not one of our 6 power words, but it's still very helpful. And I used it twice in this sentence because I'm listing 2 disadvantages here. And these 2 disadvantages are what I'm going to talk about in the rest of this paragraph. I continued by saying these days, people are used to driving their cars straight from their homes to the doorsteps of their favorite shops. But this is not possible when local authorities block vehicles from accessing the main shopping area of the city. So this here is an example of a compound complex sentence. The reason it's compound is because I have the comma but here, and the reason it's complex is I use this word when, and so this is one of the complex conjunctions of time, and I said when local authorities block vehicles from accessing the main shopping area of the city. So that's the time when it's not possible for people to use the cars the way that they want to, okay? Someone who lives a great distance from the city center might decide that it's not even worth the trip if they are forced to park their car several hundred meters from the stores they wish to visit. So this sentence is triple complex. And so someone who lives a great distance, who is a relative pronoun, so it means that lives a great distance is just describing this someone person. Someone who lives a great distance from the city center might decide that, so I'm entering a new clause in my sentence, might decide that it's not even worth the trip if. So if is a conditional, so it's not worth the trip if they're forced to park their car several hundred meters from the stores they wish to visit. So as you get more advanced with these, you're going to be creating double complex and even triple complex sentences. And so that's an example of a triple complex sentence. Then I moved on and said, additionally, businesses in these vehicle-free zones see dips in sales, not only because of decreased access to the city center, but also because customers find it difficult to purchase some large items and transport them without a car. So these are 2 reasons that businesses lose money. And so I use the word because since I'm giving a reason or I'm giving a cause and effect type of situation. So I have 2 reasons for this. So I used the word because twice. Then I start my second body paragraph by saying, while these are legitimate concerns, the pros of pedestrian-only city centers greatly outweigh the disadvantages. So because they asked for our opinion in this essay, I start out my second body paragraph by kind of acknowledging what some people believe. While these are legitimate concerns, the pros of pedestrian-only city centers greatly outweigh the disadvantages. So that is my opinion. And this sentence is complex because I use the word while to contrast these 2 points of views. While these are some legitimate concerns, while that's one point of view, the pros of pedestrian-only city centers greatly outweigh the disadvantages. So I've used the word while in a contrasting way. For one, no cars means less pollution, which results in better health for each person who frequents a city's main center of activity. So which is another relative pronoun, and I said which results in better health. So I made another complex sentence there. And then I said also, shoppers will be much safer because cars are the #1 cause of injury and fatality. And so I've made another complex sentence there using the word because. Then I end this paragraph by saying, for example, my mother was hit by a car in downtown Chicago last year, and my whole family is now terrified of visiting city centers. So that one, it's not a complex sentence. And I do want to make this clear as well. You do not need to make all of your sentences complex. You can have some simple sentences as well. And so one rule of thumb is if you're trying to get a band 7, you should try to have at least 5 subordinating conjunctions in your essay. If you're trying to get a band 8, you might need to use a couple more. I think I had about 12 in my essay here. The last sentence, which is my conclusion, it's a new paragraph. It's a 1-sentence paragraph. The conclusion says, overall, city centers are better off without cars and bikes because the benefits of health and safety are more significant than the loss of convenience and the slight drop in revenue for local businesses. So if it's an essay where they ask for my opinion, I always state it again in my conclusion, that the examiner knows 100% sure what my opinion was. And so here I said, city centers are better off without cars and bikes. That's my opinion. And then I use the word because, which makes it a complex sentence. It also allows me to give my 2 main reasons for why I believe what I believe. And that is because benefits of health, reason 1, and safety, reason 2, are more significant than any loss of convenience or the slight drop in revenue for local businesses. So that's some awesome grammar for your IELTS Writing Task 2 essay. And I do want to say there's a lot more to grammar than just this. We tried to give you a couple points that will help you boost your score, but if you go to www.IELTSCoachPro.com, we have full IELTS courses and we dig into the grammar a lot more deeply. We dig into all the question types, and so check it out. We have classes and one-on-one tutoring, mock tests. So whatever videos you want to see about IELTS, put it in the comments. Next week is the last week of our 4-week IELTS Writing Task 2 mini course. And so after that, the schedule's wide open. We're happy to do whatever people want, whatever will help people the most. So tell us in the comments. Tell us what kind of videos you want to see. Like, subscribe, share. And your free gift today is a PDF with an example outline structure for this type of essay. So if you want this free gift, just write I love IELTS writing into the comments, and we will give you a link to a PDF that has the example structure so that you can use it to follow along as you do this type of essay, and as you practice, you can follow along with our structure. And it's an excellent structure that you can practice. You can use it on test day, and you can get a really high score on these advantages and disadvantages plus opinion type of essays. So I hope you enjoyed the video. See you next week.